Hello, everybody. This is the podcast NGO Soul and Strategy, excuse me, and I am Tosca Bruno van Vijfijken. Would you like to hear a thoughtful leadership development expert, coach, leadership thinker talk out loud about the complementary value of non-Western leadership models and what they have to teach all of us in the world, including those of us in global North countries? Well, I've got a treat for you in the person of Martin Kalungu-Banda. Martin and I collaborated a few years ago on a report for the think tank Unorthodox. At that time, it was called the Luke Hoffman Institute. And the report was proposing 15 propositions for conservation NGOs that would allow them to retain their relevance, legitimacy, and effectiveness. Martin provided important comments to the report. Since then, I have listened to some of Martin's podcast interviews with other hosts, and I knew I had to get him on the show. So here you are, Martin. Welcome.
Thank you, Tosca.
It's going to be a delight. I know it. Now, I want to tell our audience, on my end there, I had a little bit of internet issues just before the recording, so I apologize up front if you sometimes experience that in listening to this. So let me jump to Martin's bio and just highlight a couple of things. Martin specializes in leadership and organizational development. He serves as a co-faculty of the Leadership Academy of the Presencing Institute. We're going to talk about what that means. And the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Global Alliance for Banking and Values. He has been a visiting faculty at the University of Cambridge, London Business School, the Oxfam Said Business School, amongst others, so very famous schools. He also, in his past, served as a special consultant to the president of Zambia. He is a Zambian national. And he helped there to reestablish the position of chief of staff in the presidency. Obviously, a very important role. Martin is also, amongst others, and I'm just selecting a few things, the author of the bestseller book, Leading Like Madiba, Leadership Lessons from Nelson Mandela. He has written other books as well. And finally, I noticed, Martin, you also have played several senior roles in Oxfam in your past as well. So, okay, Martin, let's go. So let's talk first about who you are, what gives you most joy on the work side of your life, and what do you bring to the field of leadership development or adjacent sectors?
Thank you, Tosca. As you have said in my introduction, I'm a Zambian who has been living and working out of the UK for the last 19 years or so. I hail from northern Zambia, near the border with Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
And I come out of parents, a mother who was tilling the land in order to contribute to supporting the family, and a father who was a head teacher in many primary schools in northern Zambia. I am also a husband and a father, and what drives me is to walk alongside leaders, supporting them to find the best of themselves so that they can contribute their utmost to whatever institution, community they belong to or they serve. I also love the idea of working with groups because I believe individual talent and giftedness is not sufficient for taking us to where we want to be as communities, as nations, and as the world.
Right on. Right on. And that I would like to extend that also to teams, by the way. So maybe we can talk about that. I think teams, especially in the social sector, are often a little bit undervalued, particularly leadership teams, and whether they're effective as well as cohesive. Martin, in your background, you have worked or are still working with some really high reputation organizations. And one of them, I mentioned it briefly, is the Presencing Institute at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT as it's known. And that then makes us think of a book by Peter Senge, etc., The Fifth Discipline. Those things, it's pretty heady stuff, right? So I want you to please unpack it a little bit. So for instance, the word presencing, I don't really know what that means. Would you mind explaining what that means?
So it is a word that maybe so far hasn't found itself in the English dictionary. It was coined by the Professor Otto Scharmer of MIT, and working in collaboration with others, he went about learning from talking to leaders from many spectrums, from all walks of life. And he was interested in learning about where they come from when they make the decisions that they do, when they have moved their institutions, communities, teams from one place to the next. And as he was listening to them, he realized that they were almost regardless of which cultural context they grew up in, they are working in, they explained a kind of twin movement that they got involved in order to get in touch with what is needed out of them and to that which they wanted to effect or affect. So presencing is a coined term. It comes from two terms. One, to be fully present.
Right.
The here and now. That when our attention is diverted or dissipated, we do not pick as much of what is going on and what is needed as possible. So being fully present within ourselves in this moment, and at the same time, and that's the second term, it is sensing. Sensing what is on the horizon, that which hasn't formed and taken shape yet. When you combine the two, being fully present here and now, and the capacity to stretch out to that which is emerging, this act of being present and sensing is what gave the coinage of the term presencing. And Tosca, it is a very human capacity. We lose it along the way. Our education system sometimes doesn't allow us to play with that. But in many respects, the people that Otto was talking to, the people that I'm working with now, some of them naturally access that if we learn not to be distracted, to cultivate our quality of attention, and in any case, this comes from one of the ideas that have been debunked, that we human beings are good at holding multiple things. No, we are better, particularly the more complex the situation is, the more we need to be attentive. And when we attend, and there are practices we can do to cultivate our attention while looking at the horizon, we stand a chance of having insights that people call innovative, creative. We never thought this was possible.
Fascinating. I'm so glad I asked. And I'm thinking, yes, there's a lot of wisdom in there. And boy, is that difficult, both these things. And now more than ever, right? Particularly for leaders to be fully present and to be open to what is emergent on the horizon. A good challenge for all of us, including for those of us who are leadership coaches, consultants, team coaches, etc., like you and I. Just for my understanding, Martin, do you serve people across a number of sectors, or do you particularly focus in one or two sectors?
I move across sectors. Currently, for instance, I'm working obviously with students at the University of Oxford, MBA, master's degree students. Just like in the next week, then I could be with leaders in WWF or Wetlands International. The next moment is that I will be with a group of financial institution leaders or government leaders. For me, this is a seamless web of relationships, and leadership manifests itself in pretty much the same way, even if the technical side will be different from time to time.
Okay, that's very interesting. That last sentence, also what you said, because sometimes in the nonprofit and NGO sectors, there is the idea that leadership is uniquely different or complex in their sector, and as similar to what's quite a few people seem to think is that, namely that each organization is unique. I've always been a little bit skeptical of that. And what you just said drew my attention, therefore. Okay, so let's move. You teach at Masters of Business Administration programs in famous institutions, and you practice. And so you know a lot about global leadership and leadership development models, right? You can also compare across. We know that typically in the leadership development literature, I mean the practitioner literature, not just the academic literature, there has been for decades, if not for 100 years or so, a predominance of Anglo-Saxon, particularly American, to some extent European, and with a fairly weak representation of other Western countries in those models, right? In terms of the thought leadership and the research, the data points that went into that. And it's very private sector normed with exceptions. I would like to address with you about the topic of African or other non-Western, what I call non-global North imprinted leadership models and frameworks. So my first question along those lines, and you and I talked about this in our preparatory conversation, is can you talk about African leadership models or frameworks that you feel are truly complementary, that are distinct from the global North imprinted ones? What are their important contributions? What are the important differences? And are there also big similarities?
I think that the underpinning values and principles tend to be the same. Maybe similar is a safer word.
Okay.
As the manifestation of those principles and values, it tends to differ from culture to culture, region to region.
Right.
And in many cases, and across the world, people would agree that a leader enables, that you try and make people thrive or help people to thrive, that honesty matters, that fairness is important in all forms of leadership, in all walks of life. Care for people and resources matter. So there are those fundamental principles. What I am interested in following and studying from time to time is the manifestation of that. When we talk about care, when we talk about a leader passing on the baton, how is it done in different cultures? obviously in Africa, one of the prominent thoughts around leadership is the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because Tosca, you are.
Mm-hmm.
And as I studied the philosophy of Ubuntu, I began to unravel how narrow my entry point was. Because for me, in the beginning, it simply meant me as a human being. I am intimately connected with you as a human being. My well-being is intertwined with your well-being. So I can't think of my satisfaction if by the same token, I'm not thinking of your satisfaction. When I am unwell, by consequence, you are unwell. But that was too limited.
I see.
As I went talking to elders in different communities and cultures, I learned that your well-being includes concentric rings of beings or other circles of beings. It includes people I don't know and I will never meet who are living at the present moment. It also, gone.
I was going to say, you mean when you say other people who you don't know and haven't met, but are present in current life, do you mean people who have directly, for instance, influenced you?
No.
No. Okay.
Yes, it includes those, but also if I am in Oxford, like I am today, it means people in Cambodia are intimately connected to me who are living currently. And people in Madagascar, the same.
At a global level.
Yeah. And at the same time, it includes people who came before me, my ancestors. In Ubuntu philosophy, what I do today impacts the well-being of my mother and father who passed on years back. By the same token, I will impact those who will call me their ancestors, the future generations. And then I also learned that it wasn't just about humans. It was also about non-humans, nature in its diversity and completeness. And as I sat with these elders learning from them what Ubuntu means, then they said, and that is what raises the bar of a leader's performance. That each time you are making a decision, whether it's you, an individual leader, or a collective group of leaders, have they taken care of the well-being of these concentric rings of being? Because if they miss out a major component of that relationship or those relationships, what they are seeking to create in the long term will fail. It's a kind of approach to systems thinking, even.
It is. I understand it now.
And in a way, I found out that most people who talk about Ubuntu philosophy, they limit it to only humans. It is far much more deeper, detailed than that. And then as we evolve, we keep asking ourselves, in our era, what is a good relationship with all these concentric rings of belonging and relationships? And at first I thought, this is what Africa has to offer the world. It is such a simple and yet piercing way of seeing we are not top of the value chain. And within a short period of time, a colleague of mine sent me a video. And I was surprised when I was listening to that. If I removed the voice, in terms of intonation, if I removed the color of the people that were on the video or in the video, it could as well pass on for the description of Ubuntu. No, it was talking about the Greek philosophy of Philotimo. And when we talk about Philotimo, love of not just humans, but also all the responsibilities we have that make our human life in relationship to all other beings meaningful and sustainable. So even as I describe Ubuntu, I cannot limit it only to Africa. We have cultural ways in which this manifests. For example, I began to notice that as my father was aging, he would defer or he would deflect decision-making to his older children. Obviously, all of us, when in trouble, we would run to him and explain what is not working well in our lives, the conflicts we have amongst ourselves or with other people. And then he would ask, have you spoken to your elder brother? What about your elder sister? And in a way, and we had the chance to talk about this before he passed on, I asked, is it because you are not able now to understand what is going on that you keep on deflecting to other people? And his answer was, while I'm still alive, I need to have the satisfaction that you have in the system outside me the capacity to attend to one another, the capacity to listen. And you only grow by practice. And that's why I kept on deferring to amongst yourselves, so that if you reach a deadlock, at least I'm there to come and help in one form or the other, passing on the baton while we are still active, but at the same time being cognizant of the fact that we are on our way out. So for me, it is that manifestation. But I also noticed that between my father, the way I related to my father, in Africa, we are often told children are not supposed to be heard. They are seen. But that's only partially true. Because while I couldn't, as a younger person below the age of 20, criticize my father or challenge my father, they had avenues through which you could challenge your parent. You went to your grandmother or your grandfather and said, your son, I've been telling them yellow is green and they keep on insisting yellow is green. And then my grandmother would say, leave it with me. And then she finds her own way back and they have a discussion. And because he has that natural or deep respect, he listens to grandmother differently. And then the following day, my father calls me and says, I have thought about what you were saying. I think green is yellow. And then something moves. So Tosca, for me, we need to agree on the fundamental principles. The manifestations will be different. And even in an African setting, the way I was brought up by my parents is not the way I'm bringing up my children. I encourage them to sit down and chat, but at the same time, I do infuse in there what I learned and what happens when you measure the language you use when you are engaging with your parents, how you attend to your own emotions as you are making a point with elders. So that's at the moment where I sit. I think the fundamentals are the same. The values tend to be very close. It is how we show them up or how we show in them that differs.
Yes. Wow. There's so much to think about in what you just said. And definitely, I too And of course, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable about Ubuntu. And I obviously don't come from the thought good, right, that Ubuntu represents. But I too had a much more narrow interpretation, the one that you just quoted in the beginning. So I'm so glad that I was able to learn through you that it has a much broader connotation. Let me just pick up one point. So it's incredibly wise and true what you said about those concentric circles of being, right? It is also very overwhelming as a leader. I want to use leader, and I'm pretty sure with you too, we are not necessarily talking only about people with positional power, right? We're talking about people who in some ways, as you say, make other people thrive, enable people, show a direction with honesty and fairness, care for resources and people, etc. So we're thinking about leadership very broadly, but how the hell do I embody what you just described? To that awareness, first of all, it's already very hard, as we said in the beginning, to be both present at important moments and to be open to what's emergent on the horizon. Secondly, there is so many things I should be thinking about as I lead. How the hell do we operationalize that? And in asking it, Martin, I'm revealing part of my personality, right? I tend to be fairly practical and grounded, and I'm thinking this really sounds beautiful and wise, and there's so much inside it, but how do I operationalize it as a person, as an everyday person like anybody else? Do you coach people in that?
It's a great question, and a question that I'm also asking and seeking to learn about. The little I have picked, and I try in a very small way to do at the level of, at a personal level, is simply this. It lies in initiation and practice and openness to new learning. Whatever we know is an iota of what is invited of us, what is expected of us. So as I said earlier on, you begin to notice that in our upbringing, all of us, regardless of the region we come from, in your upbringing, certain ways of seeing, acting are passed on to us. Like I do remember as a little kid, I couldn't understand why my mother would get so upset just because as soon as the mangoes started showing up in the new season and we would pick sticks and try and get some for eating, and she would be terribly, terribly upset. And we never understood that. But then out of respect and fear, we oftentimes did not do that, at least not where we could be seen. Eventually, I got to ask, I had grown up, and I said, why does this bother you so much? And my mother said, I may not have explained, but if you try and throw a stick at a mango tree with only small buds showing up like that, you are actually curtailing the cycle of mango production in the next season. But we always told you the village head person has not said the prayer yet. You only start eating the new fruit of the new season when the village head person, woman or man, has offered a prayer of thanksgiving. But the village head person always listened to a community of elders who said, now the flowering period has finished, the fruit has solidified, we can now announce through a blessing that the new fruit can be harvested. And that way, then we were guaranteed a good harvest in the next season.
Yes.
What I, even to date, challenge my own culture is that we should have spoken that quite early. It's so rich for me to understand. It's almost equivalent to what we would know in science.
Yes.
Except that it was shrouded in taboos and prohibitions. And then that stunted our knowledge and our appreciation of why this was happening.
Because what I heard in your story, tell me if I got it totally wrong, is it was an example of sensing. It was an example of being open to what's emergent, right? Through the elders were open to.
Yes.
And of course, it was an example of leading with the future in mind, by which I mean, in this context, sustainability, that you, by waiting
absolutely
to the right moment, you sustain the tree's ability to offer fruit next season, etc. Is it, are those the kind
you are spot on. You are spot on, Tosca. It is eagerly waiting. As a kid, you are anxious to have this fruit, and yet it's the moment of wait and wait, and then something begins to show up.
Right.
And it's also the involvement of other people, the elders,
knowledge,
village head, and then something is announced as, let's do the following.
Yes.
And at the same time, if I just now come back to the professional side, you talked about how do we presence? How do we engage in our capacity to go within so that we can reach far? You go within so that your antenna can spread far much further. Our ability to sense what is in the offing, not just this minute and that hour and that week, but 20 years in coming. Some of the basic practices simply are these. When I went to work for my government, working for my president, I knew that just me wasn't sufficient for serving that office. So I woke up a little earlier than I ordinarily would so that I can quietly sit by myself and focus on my breathing and feel my space, little space in this massive world. The world of Zambia, the world of Africa, and the world of world. And as I sat there, there came a point when there was nothing other than silence in me. And when I finished that piece, inside me was the kind of stillness and solidity that allowed me to meet this person of incredible power. Leaders everywhere, but more so leaders in Africa, because of our attitude and approach to leadership. They can mimic God if you do believe in any deity. They can almost do anything. And as a person serving that office, if you come just there with your old self, you are so overpowered that the only space left for you is to collude with them, to agree with them. And yet, when I sprang from that silence, I knew my little place in the world. And then I could, as politely as I could marshal myself, challenge my head of state, offer a different point of view. And I began to notice that he respected that. And at one time he asked me, Martin, why do you speak to me like that? And I said, sir, how do I speak to you? He says, you disagree with me. You challenge my point of view. And my quick answer was, I thought that was my job description. And then he would laugh and say, how come other people don't do that? And then I would respond, you would be the first one to agree that this office unnerves everyone. And the more you can be conscious of that, the more you can do what you are doing to me and do it to everybody else. Allow them the space to be themselves. But we need to find ourselves. And one way to do that is through these moments when we just stop. I'm not saying that moment in regions like my continent, Africa, where silence is replaced by prayer, silence is replaced by inner conversation. It is allowing really emptiness to reign inside us. Tosca, I'm saying this to just say one practice like that. The other practice is listening. You stop, attend to another person with your mind, heart, and will wide open. That I've chosen to talk to you today, and I'm not going to run a commentary at the back of my mind as I am hearing you. And I'm not going to come to you with a clenched heart. I open it because I assume goodwill. And for me, open will simply means leaning into possibility. That fear does come into the way of experimentation, of learning new things. So what does open will mean? Being attentive to the fact that I can increase the volume of my courage. My courage to step into something that is not 100% assured to be XYZ. All the things around us, including the tools we are using to communicate with one another from a distance, arose out of people sensing this is a possibility. But it was the courage to try and bring something to life that mattered. I am underlining the point of experimentation.
Yes, yes.
Try and error. That's the only way we strengthen these capacities. If we are too afraid to fail, then we can't experiment. And if we can't experiment, we can't birth new things.
Yeah. I'm smiling at myself, Martin, because without us even noticing, we've come to almost the end of the conversation. I have completely thrown out the interview questions that I'd had in mind because it's been so interesting to listen to you. I want to ask one more question, and it's a little bit of a pivot, but inviting you to comment, because at one level, I found so much of value in what you just told us about. I am going to ask a little bit of a counter question, and that'll be my last one. So it seems that in the last, I'm sketching this out very simplistically, but that in the last 5 to 10 years, we're finally in the world of leadership or leadership development, finding the richness of what I mentioned before, leadership frameworks outside the global north or west, right? Sometimes, particularly on the progressive side of civil society, we then see a reaction to romanticize anything that is not Western, especially at this moment in time. How do we avoid romanticizing Ubuntu, especially with an open eye to how leadership is practiced in reality, right? And how do we also acknowledge that a leadership philosophy such as Ubuntu has its own trade-offs, tensions, maybe even limitations, right? So how do you comment on that, this tendency, particularly amongst progressive, to start romanticizing that which comes from outside the global north? Or is there no need to be fearful for that?
I would say if we are committed to learning, to research, to truly being observant of what is going on around us, there will come a time when we start raising questions about anything and everything. In the case of Ubuntu philosophy, in most of the literature I came across, it ended with humans. For me, the upgrade of these concentric circles of beings that must be included came from going to learn from leaders in the community that had spent time reflecting on this, observing how life was unfolding. I'm not so sure even for them as children, they expanded it to the level that we have just talked about. Every philosophy has its limitations. Ubuntu needs an upgrade. And in fact, when I'm talking to students or I'm sharing with colleagues and friends in different circles, I call the version I told you Ubuntu 2.0, because that was not the original version of how things went. But we are constantly learning. We hold on to this centerpiece of the philosophy. I am because you are.
Yeah.
My well-being is intimately connected or intertwined with your well-being. Then we start asking, in the 21st century, how does that show up?
Okay.
How can that help us build health systems, economic systems that truly respond to this philosophy? And what does experience teach us so that we can come back and upgrade the philosophy itself? That's what I would say in my response.
So I know what I want to do. I want to schedule a second conversation with you in the future where we talk exactly about Ubuntu 2.0. That should be equally fascinating. I hope you'll accept that invitation when the time
I'm super
comes.
delighted.
Great, great. This has been just so fascinating and rich and valuable. Where can people go, Martin, to learn more about you? We have to stop this interview, and I feel it's very artificial, it's very abrupt, but you and I both have other things we need to attend to now. So where can people go to learn more about you?
As a senior faculty of the Presencing Institute, you would find my profile there, but also you'll find the profiles of many other community members of the Presencing Institute, where we are experimenting new ways of manifesting this leadership that takes us to truly the world we know is possible, the world we want. And at the same time, I co-founded the Ubuntu Lab Institute, which is the Africa Regional School of the Presencing Institute, because I began to realize that we had our own slant towards the learning we were making and we have been making in the Presencing Institute. And therefore, the doors opened where Africa is researching, learning, and the rest of the world is also doing the same. And I'm not alone in this, because colleagues in South America have also created a regional school of the Presencing Institute, because they know there are variations that can enrich our thinking and research.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's where you send us to go. Okay, we will put those links in the show notes, and I bet there will be quite a bit of interest in that. So thank you, Martin. We're going to have another conversation, and I look forward to that already. Thank you for all your insights.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I'm deeply grateful, truly. You gave us so much food for thought. And thank you, listeners. If you found this podcast stimulating, There are other conversations with leaders such as Adama Coulibaly, Charles Kojo van Dijk, and Albert Momo, Taka Awori, that either you already have access to or will soon have access to. And if you subscribe to my email list on my website, 5oaksconsulting.org, that is with the number 5, you will always be the first to be in the know about fascinating leadership thinkers and thinkers and doers in the space of change management, governance, organizational effectiveness. So subscribe to my email list through the site, and you'll be the first to know. With that, I am saying goodbye. See you next time at NGO Soul and Strategy.